Welcome to the Rainmaker Podcast, where we elevate marketing leaders inside and out. I'm your host, Veronica Rami, master marketer, executive leader, and mentor to ambitious marketing leaders wanting to advance their careers. Each episode is filled with genuine, unscripted conversations with some of the world's top marketing experts, accomplished leaders, and industry trailblazers representing brands, both large and small. Our goal with this podcast and everything we do is to help you master your role, nurture your team, prioritize your well-being, and evolve into an industry-leading Rainmaker. This is the Rainmaker Podcast. This was a really good episode. Why? Because you're going to hear a VP of marketing over a bank get spicy and a little bit mad about some marketing things that's happening. Like, don't even tell him that ROAS, return on ad spend, is the best metric. He will it will set him off. John Huntinghouse was a phenomenal guest on the podcast. I cannot wait for you to listen to this episode because he talks to me about some of the things that's bothering him right now in marketing. He comes from a highly regulated industry, and yet his perspective on team composition and building a dream team was wildly refreshing in comparison to some other people who have struggled to build a team in the conditions or the industry they find themselves in. And then we talked about how prolific he is in finding his brand voice and how intentional it was and what his mentor told him for him to break out of his shell of just saying yes when people would push back. I mean, it was a really honest conversation and the energy was fantastic. So I'm really excited for you to listen to this podcast episodes. It was a great one to have. So let's make it rain with my guest, John Huntinghouse. John, welcome to the podcast.
I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you. We have a mutual friend in common, Paxton Gray, who's also been on the podcast before. And so this is how we get to now play and have fun, which I'm really excited about. And I kind of forewarned you even before I pushed the record button. I was like, maybe it's the fiery mood that I've been in as of late. But marketing is changing, both from a leadership perspective, from a team perspective, from how we execute our craft with all these new technologies. Like there's just so much happening for us in the marketing space. Yeah. And I know a lot of us, when we're sitting around, a dinner table and we're like venting, and I'm like, what if we brought some of those conversations to the surface? What if we, talked about what made us mad? Maybe that's the Cuban in me that's like, let's get feisty. So John, let me ask you, let's just dive into the deep end. What right now in the marketing world is bothering you or that you're just kind of ruminating around personally?
Yeah, I don't think we have enough time to go over everything I have. We can have part 1 to part 10 to part 12. There's a whole laundry list. I have so many of them. I have like random pet peeves number, and I had listed 20,542. So there's a lot that I kind of rant on and go off. Something that's been more recent, just because of things that have been brought up as I've been discussing with other marketers and their experiences that they're running into. One was just how even marketers confuse certain metrics, right? So like ROAS is a big one, like ROI, generally speaking. It's one of my biggest pet peeves. It's this idea that like ROAS is like the primary KPI. It's an important KPI. Like it's for sure something that we need to look at, but something that's just like, especially when marketers get this wrong, right? Like I understand sometimes like the C-suite or board members might, misunderstand.
Sure.
And like it's their primary metric that they're looking at. But the thing is ROAS and ROI, like they're efficiency metrics. They're not growth metrics, and they're definitely not success metrics when viewed in isolation. And I just see so many marketers where they make that their North Star. Like it's ROI and nothing, right? And they just completely focus on the ROI and campaigns that lead to a high ROI. But then what you see is just, it becomes a death spiral, right? Like you're just working for efficiency and not impact. And really the job of marketers is, job number 1 is to grow the business, like full stop. That's it. Like our goal is to grow the business. And we do that in a lot of different ways. But, ROAS is a component that we look at for efficiency. But as the primary KPI, it is not a growth metric. And it's like one of my biggest soapboxes, if you will, that I will sit on is, especially with, internal and external teams, is it's an important element for us to understand how to move forward, but it is not a success metric in and of itself.
Okay, I've had this debate with other podcast
Yeah,
guests. The one that comes to my mind is Andy Crestodina, who I love very, very
yeah,
much. He's very data centric as
yeah,
well. So we had a whole episode around this, and it's like, who is to blame? Is it the C suite that can actually understand ROAS, which is why it gets the amount of prominence that it maybe doesn't deserve? Or is it because that's one of the few metrics that marketers can be the most confident behind? Because then how do you measure the success of a brand campaign or like these intangibles
yeah,
that you and I know fundamentally in our core as great marketers, ethical marketers that do make a difference? It does move the needle, but it's so difficult at times to like quantify.
yeah,
So, like, who's causing this problem where the wrong metrics are leading companies potentially, I mean,
yeah.
astray, like to that detriment? What's our responsibility as marketers? Does our hand get slapped if we're like, actually, this is not the best metric? Like, you know what I mean? Like, how do you navigate that, even from a leadership standpoint, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question, and I think
Thank you.
it starts with us, right? It's the reason why we see, and especially in banking, which is kind of the industry that I'm in right now, marketers generally, CMOs generally are trying to get a seat at the table, but especially in banking, it is not
Mm-hmm.
marketing led, right? It's CFO led, it's general
Mm,
counsel led. And so oftentimes we abdicate a lot of our responsibilities and things that we ought to own. And
yeah.
and I think so for a lot of marketers and marketing leaders, I think it needs
Mm,
the onus is on us to a help educate, but then also to help create that bridge, right, between us and the CFO and the C-suite, and be able to kind of get outside of our own marketing silos. So to help them understand and kind of see, and whether that utilizes our own examples and case studies, or if we're new to a job, it's to leverage other case studies and other
true.
paths so that they can see. But I think the onus is on us to work with them because, first of all, it's the only thing that we can control, right? Like I can't control how the CEO perceives me or perceives marketing metrics or how much education they have. But what I can control is what I do on my end to try to bridge that gap, to build those relationships and to build that, confidence of trust. And, it's one of the things that we talk about here at the bank is trust and building that. And my first year when we were building out a marketing budget, I spent almost a quarter of the year, right? Like 3 full months on trying to go back and forth on budgets and explaining why we need X,
Wow.
Y, and
Ugh.
Z. Like we just spent so much time back and forth. But over the last 5 years, we've been able to build that trust and kind of show the impact that we can have as marketers. And so this past year, it really was a simple email and a 3 slide deck, right? And it's like,
Wow.
here's the deck, here's the
Yeah.
marketing budget. This is what we are forecasting. This is what we're looking at. This is what we're trying to drive. And they kind of added their context and their information, and we were good. And it was
We're
just
good to
really
go.
simple.
Ship it.
And when
Mm.
you're able to build that trust, I mean, we talk about trust all the time. It's one of those pillars you
Mm-hmm,
talk
mm-hmm.
about in leadership, but it matters and it allows you to do more work. And so instead of spending a quarter of the year going back and forth, trying to land on a marketing budget, it was a simple email, right?
That seems like a slow kind of torture for my personality. I'm
Yeah.
like, what? Because I'm a very decisive person. Well, it's funny. I'm a high fact finder on the Colby,
Yeah.
but I make decisions quite easily. Like I make jokes where like I eat decisions for breakfast in the morning. I don't know, just
Right.
So to think that the smartest people at the company is taking 3 to 4 months to make
It's,
a
it,
decision. Wow.
it can be a long process. And
Yeah.
especially in regulated industries, like there's a reason why things can move really slowly.
Sure.
But
Sure.
yeah, for sure, it's hard, especially because my background is in agency marketing, right? And working at
Yes.
agencies, and like you're just
Yes.
constantly running and moving, and then all of a sudden you come into this industry,
Bank.
it's like, oh,
Yes.
this is hard.
Let me ask you, because you mentioned leadership, and I told you before we even pushed record that I've seen some of your ranty, like it's not even like it's like well thought out, persuasive arguments on LinkedIn when it comes to like team and this and that. How you defined already on this podcast how you see marketing. How do you define true leadership or true marketing leadership right now?
Yeah. It's a great question. And if I were
I try.
I mean, it's almost like you do this a lot, right? And you have expertise in working with this. But from my perspective, if I were to distill it down, when it comes to leadership, it really is, I mean, it's a little bit of a cliche, and we use it a lot within marketing, but it is this idea of having courage to do the right thing. Now, oftentimes when we talk about having courage to break through the noise, like oftentimes we're talking about creatives and like having that creative courage to do bold things and bold messaging. But I think it goes much more than that, right? It is the courage to do the right thing, even though you're under pressure. Or like when I first got here at Tab, like we did not have a big team, and we were stretched crazy thin across all of the requirements that we were asked for. And when I looked at that and kind of processed it and talked with my team, it was just like, there's no way we can do everything. Like if we try to do everything, it's just, one of my things that I always tout all the time, right? As marketers, we don't drown, we starve, or we don't starve, we drown. And it's that it's not that we don't have enough to do, it's we have too much to do. And we try to do everything. So it makes a lot of sense to have focus and have that discipline on having impact. But it's hard if in the process of having focus, you have to ignore certain things, right? Or you have to ignore certain stakeholders, and therefore they get mad, right? And they're like, hey, why are you not paying attention to my pet project or our product? And it's like, we have to do the most important work, and we have a limited time, band, and resources.
Yeah.
And, it takes courage to make the right decision for the business, even though it may be detrimental to certain stakeholders. So.
Okay, you have to say that one more time. That was so juicy, and I love little word truffles.
Oh yeah.
So marketers don't do this, but they do. Say it again.
Yeah. So marketers don't starve; we drown. And so that's
so good. I've never heard it before. I thought that was like, oh, that's a really great one line.
Yeah.
Because I mean, as soon as you said it, I was like, yeah. Like I just did a keynote in May in Miami, and I had on the slide, the plight of the marketer, at least since I've been a marketer for 16 years, has really always been the same, which is do more with less.
Yeah.
So that's how I see marketing teams: do more with less.
Yeah.
And then every time there's these new technological advancements like AI or whatever, like, well, can't you do more with now less? And you're like, gosh, dang it. Like, I don't want to keep, reiterating this belief system, this narrative, but I feel like that's certainly what I've experienced in almost every tenure position that I've had in my marketing career. And that quote that you shared is like spot on. I'll quote it. I'll give you credit every time I use it, because I know I'm going to use it.
Well, it is a soapbox that I sit on. So.
Can we talk about teams? Because I feel like, I know you're a VP of marketing, and titles, there's fun titles, there's traditional titles, there's creative titles. You're seeing a lot more like chief revenue officers, chief growth officers. This is something that you've touched on before as well. Like, what is growth? What team is required for really great growth? Like, I want to explore your brain when it comes to this growth topic. And it's interesting that you're the one that's talking about it, because like you said, you come from a pretty like traditional industry in this banking space, this category. So I'm like, the banking VIP of marketing has an opinion on growth. Tell me more. Right.
Yeah. Again, it's one of those things that I think is internally we have issues like within marketing, and we talk about like soapboxes and things that make me angry and that I can just go on large rants on is when I see these job descriptions, right? And it's like, hey, we're looking for someone who's creative, who's analytical, who can do social media, who can help with comms, who can do, and like it's this endless list. And they're like, and this is going to be an entry-level marketing position.
Yeah, 40 grand.
And it's like, what you just listed was a marketing growth team, not just an individual. And sometimes, going back to your point, it's like, hey, how do you do more with less? We run into this mentality, especially outside of marketing, of, hey, marketing, like you can do all of these things and that could be a single person. And the reality is that's a team, right? Like someone who is able to work on conversion rates, optimization versus paid search or paid social. Like these are different specialties. These are different individuals who contribute to that whole. and thinking more of how do I build a growth team versus trying to find this crazy rare unicorn that happens to have all of these skill sets that doesn't actually exist in a single individual. It's just unrealistic. And then it just sets yourselves up, it sets your business up and the brand up for disappointment and failure. And then it's like, oh, hey, this marketer, like we hired this growth marketer that wasn't able to do everything that we actually need a growth team to be able to handle.
Yeah, that's a frustrating part when like you and I can see as early as the job description that this poor soul, it's like, the mermaid, this poor unfortunate soul is like set up for failure before they even start day one. And then when it doesn't work out, as you and I smartly predicted, there is a lack of awareness from a higher perspective in the company. Like, it's their fault they turned over. It's like, no, no. Hey Rainmakers, it's Veronica, and we'll get back to today's episode. But before that, I have an exciting invitation for all of you aspiring, ambitious marketing leaders. If you are serious about advancing your career in marketing and you're looking for an expert to give you some personal insights, guidance, tips, then I'm going to invite you to schedule a free Pathway to Promotion call with me. This is a special one-on-one call with just you and me to discuss your current roadblocks in your career, your long-term aspirations and ambition, and the next best step for you and your personal promotion. Head to pathwaycall.com or click the link in my show notes to schedule your free Pathway to Promotion call. Now back to today's episode. This actually came up in an earlier call this week that I'm as just a peer, I'm curious to pick your brain on, because you're in a highly regulated space and I'm not. I mean, like as a marketing entrepreneur, I kind of like, I can do pretty much what I want in the capacity that I serve. So I was advising somebody, she was asking me like the best order in which to build the dream marketing team. Mind you, she is not a funded CEO. Like there's not, these angel investors that are pouring money from below, from above. And then she's building her team top to bottom. A lot of us entrepreneurs, we build our teams from bottom to top because we can only build in the order that we can afford.
Yep.
So I was telling her, like, I'm with you. I rather have a team of 20 people working even in part-time small capacities, but operating in their distinct zone of geniuses than trying to find these generalists that can fill a 40-hour work week that have to do a combination of a variety of proficiencies and skill sets at maybe a C average, if we're being honest. So it requires more editing and more do-overs than like me only working with a designer in a project for maybe 10 hours or me only working with an editor for 5 hours. Like now, me having more people operating in their zone of genius requires more people management. There's more chicks that are chirping than one single individual that I can boss around over 50 different projects and different tasks. But I personally had been much happier with the quality of output when I have, the specialist in smaller capacities than a generalist in a larger capacity role. But again, I'm not in a regulated industry. So like, we have more freedom in that regard. When you're compiling your team, how do you view W-2, contractor, retainer, consultant? Like how do you compile the cocktail team that becomes a dream team?
Yeah, I loved your approach to that because it's very similar to mine. Anyone that knows me knows that I use sports analogies all the time. It's like
I love a sports analogy. Give it to me.
It's like the lens by which I see the world, and I just see so many applications to it. But so one of the things that when you're building a team, like a sports team, right, you do need to have impact players, and then also role players, right? Like, and you need to have impact. And the thing is one of the traps that we run into all the time, and especially in marketing, right? When you're being faced with thousands of messages all the time and thousands of brands throughout your daily life and throughout the work week, you have to stand out. And from a business standpoint, it's just like you need impact players. And I would much rather have impact than just someone who can do a lot of work and that just adds to the noise. And especially when you're a small team, if you usually look at like just the co-founders, right?
Yeah.
They usually have an area of expertise or perspective that is really, really strong. And that's kind of where they get their initial niche. And the first employees, that's kind of it, they have a bias towards their strengths, right? Where they create that impact. And so when we're hiring contractors or freelancers or consultants, we hire for impact. And it's like, can you do this one thing really, really well and help us break through this ceiling, this wall that we're running into that we currently can't, afford an in-house person that can do this. But when I do hire in-house talent, and it's the same thing that the team that I built up at Tab, it's the same thing. It's like and all of the hires I made at Tab, they don't have a financial background, right? Which is always the question number one. It's like, hey, like we need someone who has banking experience, or we need someone who has, a financial background. And it's like, no, we need athletes, right? We need someone who's really, really strong at X, right?
And doing the thing.
Yeah, yes. This type of thing. And the team is built around that. And so we have someone that we hired, and she's now our AVP, but like she was an amazing PPC, marketer. Like, I mean, world class. I don't even know how we hired her. I don't even know how we got her. But she was literally like world class in that. And she can learn and adapt to these other contextual, job responsibilities that we need her to do. But that's her skill set. Like that was her wheelhouse, and that was her superpower.
Okay. I'm completely aligned with your philosophy and perspective when it comes to team composition.
Yeah.
So, but then what you brought up in that story was like someone challenged your decision. Like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
She's a PPC manager. I mean, I don't know how that's how you talk internally, but like, what about, the fact that she doesn't have a financial background, a banking background or whatever? Like, how do you, when they're, and this is speaking more to probably the company culture, but like even before this particular job that you've had, because again, you've had a career, describe your leadership style. Like, how have you navigated these crucial conversations to like get people to do what you want that don't report to you? Like that's the craft.
Yeah.
So like, how has John figured that out after so many years?
If you distill it down into one word, it really is just empathy. And being empathetic means being empathetic to those stakeholders and decision makers, and knowing that they're not out to get you, right? Like when you're having hard conversations, when you're running into pushback, it's not because they hate John Huntinghouse or they want to see me fail, right? It's because they genuinely have questions and their concerns, and that's kind of their duty, is to try to alleviate and understand some of the concerns that they have and discuss that with you. But when you're trying to be empathetic, like you really try to put yourself in their seat and in their situation, and also their worldview, right? If their background, if they're an accountant, like I can't come from it from a marketing lens because they're an accountant. And so I need to view it from their lens of, all right, this is their legitimate concerns because, from their standpoint, it doesn't make financial sense to run this campaign. It doesn't make financial sense to hire this person. So from an accountant standpoint, how do I make this case, right? Or how do I help them see that? And sometimes it's me bringing in another accountant who's been down this road, and it's like, hey, and this is what we've done in the past. When I first came on board, it was their biggest question about me, because I didn't have a financial background, and now I'm asked to be the VP. I'm asking to be the VP of marketing at a bank. But it was bringing in other other people that were like-minded to them that could kind of vouch to this path. And for me, it was highlighting the case that whether it would be like something local with like a Vasa Fitness or Eaglegate College, right? These industries that prior to me working with them, I had no experience in that realm. But I use that as a use case to kind of show them it's like, I do have a framework by which I think through these problems and how we solve these problems, and to find that consistency throughout. And we're just going to apply it now to banking. And as you do that, you start to build a little bit of trust, but there's some hesitancy. But your first 90 days as a VP or in any job is really to build that trust. It's like, now you've given me a little bit of that trust by hiring me. I'm going to validate that, right? I'm going to build upon that and show that this framework works, and that I can drive business value. But really, when you're trying to distill it down to one word, it really just comes to having empathy and being empathetic to their worldview.
Well, I mean, I'm not with you on a day-to-day basis, but I feel like if I was like a fly on the wall, it seems to me that you are very conscious and intentional in slowing down to make sure that person feels heard and that can understand versus the impatience that comes with like, gosh, why am I explaining this? Like, and that's where I think, in speaker development training, that's where they teach us, like when you're trying to explain a hard concept or a concept that doesn't make instinctual sense to somebody else of a different trade, then analogies are wildly advantageous because you can do these comparisons like, okay, well, you don't get marketing, but you get the NFL, like, right? And so then you can play with those type of stories to break down a big concept and then find that middle ground, which I think is chef's kiss. One thing that impressed, so part of my leadership style is words of affirmation as my love language. And so it tends to be the thing that I lead with a lot in relationships of any kind, personal or professional. So I want to affirm you because I really enjoy your brand voice. Like when I listen to, or when I read your posts and I listen to some of the content from your perspective that you distribute and share on LinkedIn so prolifically, and I think generously, I really actually enjoy your brand voice. So I selfishly want to ask you, because there's a lot of marketers that listen to this podcast that want to find their brand voice, or they want to find their unique, what they have to offer that's unlike every other fractional CMO, whatever, right? So how did you unapologetically, authentically find your voice that I have just kind of fallen in love with? Like, how did that come to be? Has it always been there, or was that intentional? Did you hide before you were like, screw it, I'm not hiding anymore? Like, I'm curious of your own personal branding journey.
It's an interesting journey for sure.
Okay.
And it is something that takes development and takes intentionality.
Yes.
And it takes, me wanting to make my mark in the world. But I do remember, I had an old mentor named Dennis Yu, and
oh, I know Dennis Yu.
Yeah. So,
stop.
Yeah, I mean that's where my wheelhouse came, and like in Facebook marketing, it all came from like Dennis,
All
and like that's
right.
how I got my foray into marketing, was really learning a lot of the things that he helped me learn along the way. But one of the things, I tend to be, definitely more introverted, definitely a little bit more passive, was my natural personality style, right?
Okay.
And so I tend to be deferential to everyone else. And so when I first started in marketing, I would have an idea and people would, push back on it. And I'm like, yeah, you're probably right. And then I get back down. And then I'd have another idea and then push back. I'm like, yeah, you're probably right. Like your way is probably better. Your ideas are better. And, the one thing that he said that has always stuck with me is like, if you always back down, right?
Yes.
Then you will never make your mark in the world, right? Like your work, your ideas will never get out into the wild. And then no one will ever see it, right? And the impact you're going to have on the world is just going to be less, right? Not that you won't have an impact, it'll just be less than it could be. And especially, a lot of times leaders will push back only just to see like how strongly do you believe that, right?
Yeah, no, it's true. It's true. They're testing your conviction.
Exactly. And once I started to realize that, it's like, you know what? Like, this is my genuine, authentic self. This is what I think. This is what I believe. I'm going to start putting that more out into the world. And the easiest way for me to do that was actually through social media. When, really before I went on to LinkedIn, it was on Facebook. And it really was kind of testing out, honestly, in a friendly environment with like friends and family. And it was just my perspective. And I started to kind of build that voice of, this is my genuine thoughts, right? Like, and my take and my perspective. Yeah. And one of the things that when I first, this is back in the old, the OG days of LinkedIn, my biggest pet peeves with like everyone would just repost, right? Like they would take a news article that everyone knew and they would just repost with no commentary, with no insights. It's just like, yes. I already know that happened, right? Like what I'm curious is like how you perceive it, right? How does Veronica, view this news story or this new update? Like, what is your perspective? And for me as a consumer of information, that's what I want. Right. And if that's what I want, I ought to put that back out into the world, right? As opposed to just reposting a link and saying this is a good read, like putting my lens over that. And then as I started to do that, I noticed that people just naturally gravitated towards that viewpoint, or that at least appreciated me coloring that news story or whatever that might be with my perspective based on my experience and so forth. So.
Gosh, okay. I think it was Brendan Bashar that I heard him say this. So I wanna attribute this correctly. I'm pretty sure it was him where
Yeah.
he's like, people don't pay for information, they pay for perspective. And I was like, wow, like, oh yeah, because it's
That's a
true.
good
Like
one.
information is abundant.
Yeah.
Information is at the touch of your finger, the swipe, right? Like it's actually it's too much information at this moment in time. And so what cuts through an information overload war of attention, but also world, is a unique perspective, a messenger, right? That will put themselves out there and be like, this is my perspective on this topic. You don't have to agree with it,
Yep.
but I will stand behind it, period, right? That conviction. That's very seductive. People like to be around people that are confident. And so that's cool that that was something that you learned from a mentor
Yep.
that kind of like lovingly called you out, which is really what we need when we're coming up.
Yep.
Like a lot of people will see our greatness before we'll ever recognize it in ourselves. And I think that's, gosh, it's so meaningful to be around people that see that and can articulate that for us, right?
Yeah.
Marketers are the worst at marketing themselves. Let's just put it that way. We are terrible. We're great at everybody else,
Yeah,
but terrible at ourselves.
for sure.
One of the things that we do on this podcast is we leave the last question to the guest. So now comes a time where I get a little sweaty, and you can ask me whatever it is that you want, because you've been a phenomenal guest. Just like I'm loving it.
You've interviewed so many leaders and, those in marketing and outside. And it's just, I would love to have that front row seat, right? With, your perspective. And as we were talking about that lens and that perspective. So the question I have for you is, having spoken with all of these amazing individuals and who are thoughtful and who have a wide variety of experiences, are there commonalities that stick out to you, or things that, as you are interviewing all of these various leaders, that you're like, you know what, even though they come from all of these different backgrounds and different places and different experiences, they have similar characteristics and commonalities to their approach or to their worldview?
Ah, that's a really good question. Like, what have I seen across the board if I were to aggregate
Yeah.
all of these kind of interview and touch points with people? First thing that immediately popped to my mind when you were starting to phrase your question was like, nobody gives themselves enough due credit. Like, nobody. It's wild. Like, nobody that I've interviewed that's like, I'm the hot stuff. That's me. I'm the top dog. Like, no one. In fact, it's almost like in a negative deficit where they're all like, when I start to affirm them, they just like shrink on me, and I'm like, no, like, you're a big deal and you should, so they're yes, I can tell that the consistency in, like, it's hard to receive the praise. I think they would much rather be awarded for their contribution than the person they are. So I think that's an area that all of us can learn to work on, both male and female, if I'm being honest. The other thing that's come up a lot in some of these interviews with some of the biggest people that you can imagine, or people like, just again, all walks of life, is the lack of work-life balance. I've now interviewed both men, women, VPs, chiefs, managers. Like, it doesn't matter what tier, right? How many years in the game, what title, what gender, what background. No one has really felt like they've nailed their burnout recovery or their harmonious balance between life and their work. And I think the plight of the marketer is still raging strong in our industry, in our category. And so we do see a lot of people who are like, they flirt or they get seduced by the idea of doing something radically different so they can have a better life. So even the people that are like, for example, this is off the record in a way, like, as soon as we turn off the podcast recording, if I'm interviewing somebody who's fully employed, they'll ask me like, so how did you leave? And then the people who are entrepreneurial on the podcast, I'll turn the podcast off, we're done recording, and they'll be like, yeah, do you know anybody looking for somebody? I'm like, what? So that might be a shock to this breaking news.
Right.
I think a lot of marketers are still trying to find a way to exercise their marketing craft and their passion without it depleting their personal lives and energies. And everyone's still hunting for the solution. And they don't know if it's found in entrepreneurship. They think it might be found in entrepreneurship. They think it might be found in the security of a W-2 paycheck. Like, all they know is that they don't have it. And the truth is, I've had all of those roles. I've been the W-2 employee, I've been the entrepreneur, I've been the agency owner, and I've been the speaker, road warrior. Like I've had all the marketing hats. I'm like Madonna. I don't know. I've had like all these different albums. I wouldn't call myself Taylor Swift. I wouldn't do her a disservice. But like I've tried these hats out. So I've had marketing in my bio for 16 years, but in different capacities. And they all have their advantages and they all have their wild disadvantages. So it's not that the grass is ever really greener, it's just different. And I think you just kind of have to find the one that speaks most to you authentically in the work style and the phase of life that you want to operate in. That is where I've come to after so many years of trying different pursuits. But you'd be surprised how many guests, as soon as we push the off button, will ask me how they can change what they're doing. Breaking news.
Well, I mean, it's funny because as you say that, like I'm reflecting on my experiences with other people and as I'm interacting with them, and it's something that's literally never been on my radar, like that perspective. And then now that you're saying that, I'm like, oh my gosh, it is so true.
It's everywhere.
It's literally everywhere. And so, yeah, that's a really great perspective. And it's like, oh my gosh, yeah, it's sitting right there in front of us, but like no one's acknowledging it.
You extracted it from me, so it's your fault. But anyways, John, you are lovely. You are charming. You are charismatic. Like this is the first time we've ever talked, and I'm just like, you're a dream to interview. I know that you do some speaking. Like you would be a dream on stage. Like gosh, like you just are. You're quick on your feet. You're wise. Like you're generous with your answers. I've been a big fan. So like, yay. Where would you prefer people to like hang out with you? Like go find you on LinkedIn. I mean, we'll link to it, but is that the place where we go tell you how awesome you are?
Yeah. LinkedIn's probably where I spend a lot of my time. And so it's probably the best way to connect with me.
Thank you very much for being on today's Rainmaker podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us on today's Rainmaker podcast. Marketers help other marketers. So if there's a marketer in your life who could really use a new perspective in a way that helps them advance their career, please pass this episode forward, share, leave us a review. Everything helps as we embark on helping as many marketers elevate themselves inside and out. You can always visit veronicarami.com for today's show notes, additional links to some free resources and tools for you to help you advance your career. You can always connect with us on social media at @VRami if you want more behind the scenes or a way for us to connect personally. Until next time, my friends, make it rain.